recording? All right, thank you very much again. One more time for the last master.
I cannot hear a voice. What's up with that?
Okay. Sorry, the CourseConnect for 2020. We have Jody Green talking to us from Omaha. She is going to give us everything you need to know about those little critters that we find that sometimes are good, sometimes are bad within our garden, that we all label as bugs. So Jody, it is all up to you now.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. Hopefully we can keep everyone awake during this time, because I know it's a nice day and 3 hours is a long time, but I'm gonna teach the entomology component, and honestly I could teach this for days. So I'm just gonna focus on some of the things that I see and hopefully will be relevant to master gardeners. Oh, there. So the learning objectives for this program are going to be to recognize and value insects in our landscape and system. And I'm going to focus a lot of this on our gardens and around our homes and the gardens that we help in, to understand some of the insect structures, and then how we use those structures to be able to identify them, and also in some ways be able to manage them. So getting to know the pest, or getting to know the insect or organism, will help us determine whether it's a pest or not, and then also help us decide what kind of tactics we need to use. But hopefully some of the pictures that I'll use in this show will show some of the life stages of common insects that you'll see. So through the next few hours, I'm going to take you through what is an arthropod, and insects are one of those. What makes these arthropods and insects so successful, what makes them pests, what makes them beneficial to us, and then also the arthropods in our ecosystem. So to introduce myself a little bit, so I'm an extension educator. I'm an urban entomologist, so we have amazing crop entomologists, and there is a really great Department of Entomology in Lincoln, but I am one of the few urban entomologists, so my specialty is actually like termites, bedbugs, roaches, and ants. But I do really enjoy any type of insect or arthropod. But so I'm with Nebraska Extension, and my job is to identify bugs in the office and to help people with their pest problems, and then deliver a bunch of entomologically based programs like this one to people in Nebraska and sometimes outside of Nebraska. But in my free time, it's still about bugs, so I'm always bugging out. It's my favorite pastime. I like to look for bugs and see what's out there. This is a picture from the backyard farmer garden. It's like my favorite place to be, basically. From April to September, I sometimes sit in the bug chair that I share with Wayne and used to share with Jonathan Larson. Sometimes I sit beside the turf guy, sometimes I sit beside Dennis Ferrara, but I always have a good time answering garden bug questions. So that's something that's new to me, but also just so fun. I do have a strong appreciation for creatures, and so even though a lot of my job is trying to help people manage them and kill bugs, I do like to show the joy and wonder and curiosity of the things that we can find out there. And I find that all ages could learn to love bugs and at least understand why they're with us. So what are arthropods? And we do talk about insects a lot.
This is not.
We do talk a lot about arthropods.
I'm really disappointed, man. This is not good.
But so insects belong to a phylum of animals that are known as arthropods, and there are many.
I messaged her.
And some of these are in this chart right here. But most of the life on Earth are actually some sort of arthropod. And the far right over here, this is where hexapods are, and that includes insects. But even if we were to see a different arthropod every day of our lives, we would still only see very, very little. So one of the comments I get on a daily basis is, well, I've never seen that before. And sometimes I'm not surprised. We are always seeing new things, and when you start looking for stuff, you'll certainly find it. One of the things that we have a problem with, in this business is trying to identify what they are and being able to talk to other entomologists or people about what we're seeing. And some things that make this hard is that arthropods and insects, they have many common names. And so what you may call a potato bug or a daddy longlegs may not be what I think is that specific creature. So in the classification of living things, arthropods are a type of phylum, and then you go down to the class Insecta, and then it goes to an order. So for this example, it's the honeybee. This is in the order Hymenoptera, which also includes ants and bees and wasps. And so then you go to a family and a genus and a species. So when entomologists talk to each other, then we will try to use the scientific name so we know exactly what species we're talking about. Because, we call oriental cockroaches water bugs, and there actually is a water bug. So this is something that we run into a lot of issues, but if you can even say what kind of family or describe it properly, according to some of its features, we can help identify that. So Arthropoda is the phylum, and it's separated into those with mandibles, so those that bite and chew their food, and those that have chelicera. And in that category, we're going to simplify it, but we're going to put arachnids there. And so the ones that I'm going to talk about, the arthropods, are ones that we're going to see in a garden or around your home. So first, let's talk about what arthropods all have in common. And we have some things in common with arthropods. One of those things is we have jointed appendages. Arthro means jointed, and poda means foot. So that's why it's arthropoda, just in case you're wondering. And a crab is an arthropod. So, and the illustration on the right there, these are all different forms of arthropods. Some of those are insects, some of those are arachnids, some of those crustaceans, but they all have jointed appendages. Arthropods are also symmetrical, and we call this bilateral symmetry. And we should be, too. We've got 2 arms, 2 legs, and they're both on the opposite side of our bodies. Insects and arthropods, they have bilateral symmetry. They also have segmented bodies, and depending on what type of organism it is, it will have a varied amount of segments. So insects will always have 3 body parts, whether we can see them or not, that make it distinguishable or not. They do have 3 body parts, and arachnids have 2 body parts.
They don't do anything.
They've got cephalothorax, which is like the head and the thorax fused together. And then they do have an abdomen, whereas insects will have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And the thorax, and in this illustration, is also in 3s. So we'll find that insects, they kind of have a rule of 3s, and they do have 3 body parts in 3 different forms throughout different anatomical regions. So something that's a little bit different between humans and arthropods is that they have an exoskeleton. So this is a wax cuticle that covers their body, and they need to shed that exocuticle, so that exoskeleton, to grow and to develop. And one of the common ones that we see most often, and we find those shed exoskeletons, are the cicadas. We've got the 17-year cicadas, and we also have our annual cicadas. And sometimes people complain that they're loud, but that's their mating call. That's what they do. So this exoskeleton is just a huge characteristic for insects and spiders and all those arthropods. So when it comes to these arachnids, they've got 2 body parts, as I mentioned. They have 4 pairs of legs. They have no wings, and they have no antennae. And a lot of times, we think of arachnids, we think of spiders, but there are a variety of arachnids. Some of them we have here, some of them we don't have here. But we've got pseudoscorpions, which are a lot smaller than this illustration or this picture here. But mites, ticks, daddy longlegs, tarantulas, these are all in the, they are all arachnids. So when we go over into the mandible side, we've got Myriapoda, we've got centipedes and millipedes. And we commonly see these in the garden. Sometimes we see these, you know, in and around the home. But typically they have long bodies, they have many segments, many legs. They also don't have wings, and they have one pair of antennae on their head. When people want to know what the difference is between centipedes and millipedes, centipedes here we've got on the left, they are fast, they're pretty flattened from the top down. This one's a house centipede, so it's got very long legs. These are commonly found in the home, scaring people, but we've got different centipedes that are outside, you know, under pots and in the soil. But centipedes are predators. So if you find one, they're taking care of some of the bad bugs that may be in your house. On the other side, millipedes are usually a darker color. They can be a cylindrical shape. Often people say they're crunchy if they step on them. So they've got a very tough exoskeleton. And I mean, they both have segmented bodies, but when you look at a centipede, each segment has one pair of legs, whereas in a millipede, each segment has two pair of legs. And, you know, some places, especially rural areas, when they have an infestation of millipedes emerging from the soil, they have hundreds. So, you know, that's common in some places. The next group we're going to talk about is Crustacea. And even though, you know, we see these lobsters and crabs and you wonder why this is in this talk, well, we've got a land crustacean called a roly-poly is the common name, pillbug, sowbug, woodlouse. These are always in the garden under rocks. They're decomposers. So, oh, I forgot that part. The millipedes are decomposers compared to the centipedes, which are predators. But in the places you'll find millipedes is also, it's common to find these woodlouse or pillbugs, whatever you want to call them. But they have many segments. They've got 7 pairs of legs. They are also wingless and 1 pair of antennae. Pillbugs are the ones that roll up into a perfect little ball or pill, and sowbugs are the ones that don't roll up into a ball. And if you look really closely, it's because they have these appendages that stick out at the end of their abdomen that prevents them to roll up entirely. But they are common. I think I turned over a pot in the Hope Garden just because I was, winter's been very long. I haven't looked at a lot of bugs, and so this is where I could find them. But this is, yeah, we call them, they have a lot of different common names, but pillbugs, sowbugs. So lastly, we're going to get to Insecta. That's the class. They have 3 body parts, head, thorax, and abdomen. They've got 3 pairs of legs. So there's always an exception to every rule. We want to say they are winged, but not all of them have wings. And when they do have wings, they usually have 2 pairs, but not always. So in the case with the order of flies, they only have 1 pair of wings. So it can be confusing, but when an insect has wings, it normally has 2 pairs. And it does have a pair of antennae. And so let's start to get to know these insects. So as you can see, this is just a little, you know, 9 pictures, kind of like the Brady Bunch. This is by photographer Alex Wild. And it's just to show how diverse insects are, and you know, the colors, the shapes, the features. I mean, they're just amazing creatures. And, you know, it's said that there's probably about 1 million species that have been identified. And, you know, I mean, there's ones being identified each day. But, you know, they pretty much rule the world. There's not a lot of places you can go that you can't find them. They are very adaptable. They are, you know, pretty small, relatively small size compared to us. So they can go unnoticed for a long time until populations get large. And then we, you know, kind of get alarmed about it every now and then. That exoskeleton that I talked about is pretty amazing. It protects them. They also have a lot of really cool defense mechanisms that help them evade, you know, us and predators and sometimes each other. Their metamorphosis, I'll talk about that a little bit and how that helps them with their survival and their success. And then also some reproductive strategies. because that's their goal in life, is to, you know, mate and reproduce. And then we can talk a little bit about some of their specialized body parts that make them very successful. So insects are adapted to all climates. We typically say if it's winter, they're usually, you know, hiding or migrating or overwintering somewhere. But there are some pretty cold places that have some insects. I've seen, you know, midges in the snow. There are also things called snow fleas, which are a type of springtail. And sometimes on warm days, they'll still come out. But we can have habitats in, you know, rainforests, in lakes, aquatic insects, in deserts, in gardens, throughout the world. Basically, we can even have, you know, a whole little infestation in under a piece of paper, flower pot, in the flower pot, in the turf. So you get my drift. They're pretty much everywhere. And we really can't escape them, you know, in our plants, inside, outside, in our food, even in our pantry, some of our property, the things we build our homes with, the stuff we put in our, you know, fireplace, the soil that we have outdoors, our turf. We've got insects that feed on our blood, and also, you know, ones that are pests of our pets. So they're pretty much everywhere. They're pretty small, so they remain unnoticed in these microhabitats where these conditions are right for them. And hopefully you can see these pictures, and I've tried to label them the best that I can, so that when you see the picture, you're seeing what kind of insect is there, or what kind of damage is there, or evidence. But in this picture here, this is a half cup of thief ants. These are very, very small ants. They do live outdoors, but they are considered grease feeding ants, and they were found in a motor. So you put those under a microscope and you see this little ant with these two nodes, and it all matches up for something that a thief ant would nest in. Also, a lot of times we don't pay too much attention to those minute pirate bugs that are predators of, you know, small plant bugs. But in the fall, they come out and they start probing our skin, and they, you know, they bite us, and we feel a little offended. But most of the time we don't notice them, and they're out pretty much, you know, from spring all the way until fall, but we just kind of ignore them because they don't bother us. And then something I'm very familiar with that you don't find outdoors are bed bugs, and they're pretty small, and we carry them around. They go with, you know, where people go, and this is some of their evidence or damage, their frass or fecal marks, you know, in a book here, but they're pretty tiny. So a lot of times we need to, you know, be a little bit more aware, get to know what kind of things we need to look for, the signs and symptoms of what that pest or that insect looks like. So again, pest management involves some handy dandy tools, right? Like a flashlight, a bright light, a magnifying glass. I really like lenses that can clip onto my phone so I can take a picture. But I have this illustration, or this picture of a router, because you can have, and I have seen this, whole colonies of odorous house ants live inside the router. It's warm, it's protected, it's nice, and it's pretty close to people and pretty close to food. So, you know, they don't need a whole lot of space to have a harborage. And these are, you know, bed bug habitats under the seams in the fold of mattresses or box springs, and, you know, right under that corner guard. So we need to be pretty smart, and we need to get our tools and look in those cracks and crevices where we know they like to hide. And, you know, with cockroaches, there's something called thigmotactic. So they will seek out cracks and crevices and other tight spaces because they like to have something touching the top of their body and something touching the bottom of their body. So this is one of the reasons why bug bombs don't work for cockroaches or bed bugs, right? A lot of times those foggers or those bug bombs are going to release a space spray, and the particles are going to come down and they're going to land on our surfaces, which are probably more toxic to us than any bug that's hiding in a crack or crevice or in a seam. So, you know, knowing the insect that we are trying to stop really matters when we think about how we want to manage it. And sometimes, you know, those options aren't going to work. So, you know, don't spend your money and don't expose yourself to pesticides. So that exoskeleton of these insects, they're very strong and they provide a lot of strength and protection for these insects. Unlike us, who we've got skeleton and our muscles are attached, their muscles are attached to their exoskeleton. And that exoskeleton has a waxy layer and it prevents dehydration. They're small, but they are very prone to dehydration and desiccation. So they do need to have that protective layer. And you can see in this right picture, these Madagascar hissing roaches were actually getting harnessed up because they were going to be in a show where they were going to pull, I think they were going to pull little fake tractors or something, but they're very strong. This exoskeleton is very sturdy for them. One of the things that we do to try to combat that exoskeleton as humans is that we will use products that lead to moisture loss of insects and dehydrate them on purpose. So that's why we use diatomaceous earth in some cases, and that's why we use dust like silica gel, which is featured, I think, over this one. So it cuts them up and it allows moisture to be released from their exoskeleton and they won't survive. In terms of the silica gel, that one even acts more of a sponge. When you think of silica gel, you think of those little packets that are found in like your pepperoni or your shoes or purses. You know, it's to reduce moisture in those areas. And that's pretty much what silica gel does. It draws the moisture out of the insects. And so this actually is something that they are not resistant to, because this is something that really physically on the outside can help control them. Also, insecticidal soaps, we talk a lot about in how they kill insects, is because they break down that waxy lipid layer of that exoskeleton. That's why we tell people when you pick those Japanese beetles off your rose bushes or your plants to just dump them into soapy water. So, I mean, the water is not going to kill them, but the soapy water is going to. The same way, sometimes you can mix, you know, Dawn dish soap and water and spray overwintering pests on the wall, or you know, spray ants. Like if you contact them with soapy water, it will kill them. I mean, it's not going to leave any residual, but that's why it works. So insects have developed some really cool defense mechanisms that aid in their survival. Sometimes it appears like they have superpowers. So they're able to play dead when it's convenient. Mostly that time when you're going to go pick them off the plant to remove them, they can just let go and play dead. They have some chemical irritants that they can release. Some of them have venom, repelling odors. Some of them have sharp spines. They can also have stingers, armor, and then mimicry, camouflage, and aposematism. And just in these pictures alone, you can see a blister beetle. This here is a very camouflaged brown marmorated stink bug nymph on a tree trunk. And then in here, this little guy is a jagged ambush bug, and it's blending in, you know, perfectly with the goldenrod here, just waiting for a flying insect to come by. One of those that I talked about, just that fall off of the plant and play dead and then you can't pick it up, is one of those creepy loosestrife sawflies. It's a larva of a non-stinging wasp, so it's a sawfly larvae. Looks like a caterpillar, but it rolls off the plant and just will keep rolling and you won't be able to find it. And then if you turn your back, it'll just climb back on the plant, but they do cause damage to Virginia creeper. Other defense mechanisms, swallowtail caterpillars, which you know, feed on parsley and some of those other garden herbs. They will also extend this orange osmeterium out of the top of their head when you bother them. So, you know, if you've got a nice one, you probably have never seen that, but when you start poking at it, it will release some of that liquid there that you'll see. It will sprout out this osmeterium and it will smell, and it will also try to arch its back and touch you with it so that you smell. So, I mean, it's kind of mean, but it also just doesn't want to be bothered. And then other insects like stink bugs, western conifer seed bugs, a lot of squash bugs, they smell, and some of them will release these stinky liquids from their body parts to let you know that they do not want to be eaten, and you pretty much don't want to eat them. And I've tried to feed brown marmorated stink bugs to like spiders and things like that, and they won't even eat them. So some beetles, like the blister beetle, can release chemicals that will burn the skin. And then others have venomous spines, like some of the spiny caterpillars that you may see. It's a good rule to always be wary of some of those spiny caterpillars, because you just never know, but it can be very dangerous to people. So, you know, for blister beetles, they're a big garden pest, and we do say to pick them off, but you want to wear gloves, and you just want to make sure that you're protecting yourself. This IO moth, as a larvae, has got these really pretty spines, but as an adult, it's, you know, harmless, and it's this pretty moth with these big eye spots. Some people will tell me they saw a leaf bug, and this is actually a katydid, so it's related to a grasshopper, but it's very camouflaged, so you would not be able to see it there. I don't know if you can see it in this picture, but that's what that is. So a lot of insects, they don't want to be seen, so they will hang out where they're most camouflaged. And then others, they want to be seen because they want to tell you and other predators, you know, don't touch me, like I am not safe. And so this is the cow killer ant, which is a female wasp that has a very painful sting. I have not been stung, and I don't think it's killed any cows, but it is called the cow killer. But those coloring, that bright red color, I mean, it's noticeable, and people will always write or email or call and ask about it. But, you know, they're not going to infest, and they're not usually a problem, but you just don't want to step on it with bare feet or, you know, touch it or handle it. And the same with the cicada killer wasp. Those bright colors that, you know, striking black and yellow together, it's a sign that says, you know, don't touch me because I'm going to sting you. And whether it's male or female, and the males don't sting, and actually the females are not really interested in you either, you know, it tells people to leave them alone, even though they probably aren't going to hurt you. But, you know, that's their warning signal. Mimicry is also a way that insects can get away from predators. We know about the viceroy. It looks very similar to a monarch butterfly, which is toxic to birds if they try to eat it. And this viceroy here, you can tell that it's not a monarch because of this vein right here, this black line that goes through. They look pretty similar. It's still very pretty. And then other insects, they will escape being eaten because they look like poo. So this is a bird dropping moth, and this tiny, a younger instar of a black swallowtail, they look like poop. And if you look like poop, nobody wants to eat you. So, you know, good for them. There are also many non-dangerous insects that look like stingy insects that still send that message, but they can escape. This really cool moth looks very wasp-like. So it's a reddick clearwing, but those colors just say, you know, don't eat me. And, you know, a lot of insects that have stingers, they're all going to be female, because it's a modified ovipositor, which is used to insert or lay eggs. So, you know, if the male looks like a female and also doesn't have a stinger, they get left alone. In this grid over here with these 12 pictures that all look kind of, you know, wasp-like, the ones that are circled, these are all a type of fly. So these do not have stingers, and they're harmless, but I'm pretty sure when you look at them on first glance, you may think that this may be, you know, a bee or a wasp. So insects and other arthropods, they have to molt. So they shed their exoskeleton and they grow. They get to the next stage. You know, certain insects have a number of instars or growth stages. You know, we have like, you know, infant, toddler, teenager, whatever. They've got different instars, and it's usually like, you know, first instar, second instar, third instar, and some of them will always have 3 instars in their larval stage, and some of them will always have 5 instars. And so we always kind of know when that particular insect will molt, and it really depends on the hormones. It depends on some of the environmental conditions, but you will see their shed exoskeleton. So, you know, we did talk a little bit about cicadas, but sometimes you'll see a cockroach exoskeleton, and sometimes you'll see like mantids or spiders. Cellar spiders will leave exoskeletons. And, you know, when you find a bedbug exoskeleton, it's a pretty bad sign, but that means, you know, insects are breeding and growing and developing. So that could be a sign that there's a problem. And this picture here, this is a newly molted cockroach. And so a lot of these, they come out perfectly white without pigment because they are soft and they don't have, you know, they're not hardened and they don't have any pigment there. But if you left them for an hour and you came back, it would look the same as the other ones. But again, so immature and adult, sometimes, depending on their type of metamorphosis, can look and appear very different. So these two things up here, this is the Japanese beetle in the immature phase and as an adult, right? And then this is a discoid cockroach. We don't have these here, but this is what it looks like as an immature, and this is what it looks like as an adult. So as an adult, it's going to have, if it is a winged insect, it's going to have wings. And when an insect is an adult, it usually stops molting and it's able to mate and produce offspring. So, you know, if you see a tiny little bug and it's got wings, it is adult, but it's just small, right? Okay. So, and in some cases, like in this, the Japanese beetle, the immatures and the adults can appear very different. They could have a different habitat, different behavior, very different food source. So that is a form of, you know, their success because they're going to be in different habitats. So we can talk about different types of metamorphosis. Let's first talk about complete metamorphosis. We all know about the hungry caterpillar and how it goes into a cocoon or a pupa. All complete metamorphosis organisms that go through that, they will have an egg, a larvae, a pupa, and an adult stage. And like here, these are fleas. So this is an immature flea. Looks very different than an adult flea. The adult flea is the pest stage, right? This is the stage that they are getting onto our pets, living, you know, their 100% of their time as adults on the pet, biting, feeding on blood. At this stage, they are not. They're living off the pet and they're feeding on the feces of the adults. And if you look at this here, if we see or have a flea infestation, only 5% of that population are actually adults. So, you know, this is good to know in terms of management because we want to break that life cycle. That's ultimately our goal, to stop these pests. And if we know that the majority of them, 95%, are not adults, then we need to focus on other types, you know, parts of their life. Mealworm beetles, they also go through complete metamorphosis. And, you know, some stages of insects, they are not going to be, you know, really destructive. Most of these, if they're a problem, it's going to be the larval stage. But these ones, they're easy to watch and easy to keep. Some of the insects that you may come across in your garden in various stages, here are two pretty popular ones, and it goes from egg larvae to adult, are these lacewings. And so their eggs are laid at the end of stalks. And when they emerge, they're very, very hungry, and they will feed on a lot of small plant bugs. They look like little alligators with giant jaws. And then as adults, they look like this lacewing, very lacy. You'll see them around the porch lights. And then, you know, a variety of ladybugs we'll see, or lady beetles. Their eggs are usually laid on the underside of leaves, and their larvae are pretty voracious too. They kind of look like little alligators. They're kind of cute. And then this is the pupa stage. In the pupa stage, most insects are not moving, definitely not feeding. They're just kind of, you know, developing into the adult phase. And this is what it looks like as an adult. So, you know, you can see very different, very different lives, but these are both a type of predator that are sometimes purchased and released into greenhouses or controlled settings to take care of aphids and whiteflies and other garden or greenhouse pests. So on the other side of, we call it incomplete metamorphosis. So there is no pupal stage. It goes egg, nymph, and adult. The immatures are just smaller wingless versions of the adult. So this is a German cockroach here, and you can see that it's, there's no like kind of dormant stage. They're just going around getting bigger, and then as an adult, that's when it has wings. This is what the egg case looks like, and here are some smaller nymphs before reaching adult. Bed bugs also go through incomplete metamorphosis. And the reason why this is important is because when they're a pest, they are a pest at all these stages of their lives. So each of these stages need to feed, whether it's a plant or an animal that they feed on. In such the case with the bed bug, they need to feed at every stage. So that means they're always going to be a pest, and it's going to be something that it doesn't matter if they're young or doesn't matter if they're old. You still just don't want them there. So an example of two major pests of squash that have different types of metamorphoses are the squash bug and the squash vine borer. So the squash bug is a true bug. So that means it has a piercing, sucking mouth part, and it undergoes incomplete metamorphosis. And we know from just experience, especially last year, we had so many problems with, our squash and squash bugs. So they lay their eggs usually on the underside of the leaves. They emerge into these tiny little nymphs, and then they kind of grow up, but there are overlapping generations. And each of these stages of nymphal stages are feeding and sucking on the squash plant. So it looks pretty bad in a short amount of time. But these adults, when you see them, they're mating and laying eggs, and it's like just multiple generations. And so, you don't really get a break with the squash bug. In comparison, we've got the squash vine borer, which is a moth, this red moth with like these little furry legs. And what it is usually doing, it's around flowers and it's trying to gather nectar, but where it's going to deposit its eggs are going to be on the vine of the squash plant. So if we don't see that happening, we don't know that this is going to be a future problem. And what happens is the larvae emerge and bore into the vine of the squash. So very different insects. And because of their development, there's usually, for the squash vine borer, it's the larvae that does the damage, right? So in terms of reproductive ability, insects are able to reproduce and have a lot of offspring. So this picture here on the right, these are subterranean termites. It's a type of social insect. So there's one queen that is laying all of the eggs. And in some cases of ants, like carpenter ants, they've got one queen and she does all the egg laying, but then there's different castes that take care of them. So there's that. Other insects, they lay egg cases or egg capsules. Cockroaches have ootheca, which out of these emerge a number of nymphs. And so, with the German cockroach, there can be up to 40 nymphs in one of those egg capsules. Garden insects that produce ootheca are also, praying mantids. And we see these a lot from the Chinese mantid. In here could be hundreds of nymphs that look just like the adult, just smaller, and they're just as predaceous, but they need smaller prey. And this is the native Carolina mantid egg case that we'll see also on vegetation or structures around the garden. And they emerge usually, the end of May, beginning of June, when there's enough insects and other little invertebrates for them to eat. A lot of times they're not going to emerge if it's too cold and if they don't have food. Some insects hold on to their eggs to protect them from predation. So as with the water bug, the female lays the eggs on the back of a male and he swims around, protecting those eggs. With the German cockroach, one of the most successful roaches that will probably be around forever, her egg capsule has the most nymphs in it, but also she carries it around until she's ready to drop it. She doesn't just leave it anywhere. She's really protecting that. So entomologists, we use what we know about the insect life cycle to disrupt and manage them and break that life cycle. We are able to, synthesize growth hormones. So we use IGRs sometimes to treat insects like cockroaches and fleas, so that we can limit their growth and stop their reproductive capability. We also know the pests, so we can stop it before it reaches the damaging stages, and also before it reproduces. And so, this is how we can limit them and slow down their life cycle. It's also good to know what stage an insect overwinters, so we can, do some seasonal or cultural prevention in the garden. We always talk about, rotating crops and cleaning up leaf litter. And so if we know what stages they're going to be going through the winter, then we can try and manage that using IPM. So here's a little bit about, let me see how we are for time, insect anatomy and some of their specialized body parts. So, I mentioned a couple of times that insects have 3 body sections: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. We're just going to go a little bit deeper. So the head, the head is well, we need our head, they need their head. It's the center for sensory perception. That's how they receive what's going on in the world around them, chemical and physical too. So, this slide says it houses the largest, ganglion. So that we call that their brain, but they do have different organs throughout their body that allow them to react to a stimulus or stimuli. One of the things they do have, when we talk about eyes, they have something called ocelli, or simple eyes. And usually they're these little 3 eyes in a triangle, very tiny ones. And these perceive light and dark. So they don't see images, but they can tell if it's getting darker or lighter. And a lot of times that will, govern their behavior. Insects are also, cold-blooded, so they really rely on the environment and the temperature in the environment to, survive and go about their day and all their actions. And so they need to know these to detect whether it's daytime or nighttime. Those big eyes that are just so cool, these are called compound eyes. They're made up of many facets that come together. We call them ommatidium. And the way they see is very different than the way we see. I know that there are different, masks or devices that we could try to look to see what it looks like as an insect. And this is what people think, that it looks more like a kaleidoscope. But in reality, insect vision, it's a composite. So it may be a little blurry, but they can still see, the composite of what we may be seeing. So that's insect vision. But the cool thing is that, some of them can't see color, but a lot of them can. And that's why, we do have different sticky traps or types of traps. So like, bees will prefer yellow or blue or white. Fungus gnats and those other ones, they like, in greenhouses, they like the yellow. They can also see green and violet, some of them, and some can even see ultraviolet light. But what they can't see is red. So we use that to our advantage. So, in cases where people are really, they really want to kill a wasp nest or take down a wasp nest, and it's not, the safest thing to do, we tell them to do it at night and to wear a red light, because that way they can't see you coming, and it's a little bit, well, it's a lot safer. But, knowing that they can't see red is a good thing to, a good time and a good way to observe insects if you want to see them. But when they look at flowers and other things, they see things differently. So for them, their goal is to collect nectar. And so when they look at a flower, they may see this visual here on the right, and it's just like a target toward where that nectar is. So that's where they want to go. So, insects, they are, they've got that vision. Also, insects have these pair of antennae, and they're used for a number of things, not just, hearing. They can use it for smell, they can use it for touch. And a lot of times, if you watch an insect enough, you can see them grooming themselves and cleaning off their antennae. But, sometimes they do have, some insects have, hearing devices on their legs or their abdomen. They do have sensory hairs called setae or setae, or it also can feel vibrations and wind and the air moving. Some insects, they feel pressure and heat and things like that. So they need that head. That head is very good. It's sensing all those for them. Antennae also detect pheromones, and so pheromones are a chemical signal from other individuals. It could be from nestmates, it could be from other species, but there's a number of different kind of pheromones. There are aggregation pheromones. It's what brings a lot of the same insect together in the same place. In this case, it's ladybugs. In some other case, it's stink bugs or cockroaches. It just is like the party pheromone, and it tells the other insects that that's a safe place to go. And sometimes it's in the feces, sometimes it's in the exoskeleton, but they release that, and it's a signal, and it's a way they communicate. Aphids have an alarm pheromone, and so do other insects like honeybees. It's a way to warn the rest of the others that there's danger. If you ever go up to a lot of aphids and you like blow on them or touch them, they'll do a little dance, and that's a little bit of their pheromone. But there are pheromones that other insects will give off to tell other insects not to lay eggs there because they've already laid eggs there. There are trail pheromones, like ones that ants have. They drop their abdomen when they find food, and they drop a trail, and other insects in that other foragers will find that trail, and after they walk it many times, it gets reinforced by other ants. And so sometimes you'll see those ants, and they're making kind of like a beeline to that food because that signal is there, right? And then also there are many different types of like sex pheromones. Most of them are the female sex pheromone being released so that the males know how to find the females. And so they will, some of them can last for a really long time, and some of them, if you think about the Japanese beetle pheromone in that trap, they can draw in male Japanese beetles from like 5 miles away. So, it's a pretty effective pheromone trap. Insect antennae come in many shapes and a variety of sizes, and it's very interesting. If you actually take a look at them, there are all these different kinds. So, when you think about it, or if you see a bug, or if someone brings you a bug, you can sometimes identify it by the shape of its antennae, by the shape of its shape of its body, also the shape of its mouth part. We'll talk in a little bit, but these are a variety of different kinds. Some of them, if you see this aerostate or stylet, which is like a finger-like projection, this one is like a little club with a hair, then we know that is going to be a fly. And sometimes, we will get mixed up. Is this a wasp or is this a fly? And we can look at those eyes, we can look at these antennae, and we can determine, we can narrow it down. So that it's very helpful. Even sometimes between the sexes, like mosquitoes, the female mosquito antennae and the male mosquito antennae are going to be very different. So the males is very feathery and plumose, where the females isn't. In some moths, the males are going to have much larger antennae because they need to seek out that female and try to detect that pheromone. So, there's a variety. You can read about this. I know it's in that Intro to Entomology book, the different types of antennae. And there are also different types of mouth parts. So they essentially have the same parts of the mouth, but they're just modified in different shapes. So you can look at an insect and you can see how specialized it is. So you can see how, what they may feed on, where they may feed on, what kind of damage they would do to, let's say a plant. But these are some of the main ones are going to be the chewing mouth part, which, grasshoppers and beetles and termites and ants, that's a chewing mouth part. There are, the second most popular is going to be that piercing and sucking mouth part that I talked about when it comes to true bugs and, aphids and stink bugs. and they have that, usually on the underside of their body. But there are a couple other ones. We've got sponging. And I think your notes may have this one. It had bed bug earlier, but it isn't. It's a type of assassin bug. I switched it in because I thought it was cooler because I showed too many bed bugs. But you can see that this is a piercing, sucking mouth part, and it's held underneath. And that is a type of assassin bug that preys on other insects. But sponging mouth parts, that's something that a fly will have. Some flies, like house flies, and it's just this weird kind of like foot that comes out, and the sponging mouth part can only sponge up liquid. So that's why, flies have to kind of regurgitate and throw up on the food to liquefy it. That's why you don't eat any food when a fly lands on it. But they've got a special type of mouth part. Moths and butterflies have a siphoning mouth part. They have a proboscis that rolls up underneath, and they use it like a straw to sip up nectar and also water. There are insects that have chewing, lapping mouth parts. This could be, some bees, wasps, where they need to cut into things and then suck up fluids, but it's a little bit different. And then thrips, they have something called a rasping mouth part, and it's a little bit different, but it's for plant fluids. So now when we move to the thorax, its specialty is for locomotion. So it's, to get places. And when an insect does have wings, it's going to have its wings on this thorax. So that middle part of the body, and the thorax is split up into 3 segments, and the legs will be attached to the last 2. So there's the prothorax, mesothorax, and metathorax. And so each one of these will have the legs, but the wings will be on the last 2. Except in a fly. The fly will have its wings on the mesothorax, and the wings that should be on the metathorax have been reduced to like little knobs, and they're called halteres, and they're used for balance. But you can see them very clearly if you put them under a microscope. So this is a wasp, and it's got 2 pairs of wings. So going to legs, legs will always have these 5 main parts. The coxa is going to be what attaches to the body, the trochanter, the femur, so that's like us, we have a femur, the tibia, we also have a tibia, and then these are called tarsi, or the tarsus, and at the end there may be a tarsal claw. The reason this is important is because sometimes we identify insects by their legs, especially some that are quite specialized. Like here we've got some digging legs of a mole cricket, some swimming legs, a diving beetle, raptorial legs, of ambush bugs and praying mantids. We can always tell crickets and grasshoppers and katydids by these long jumping legs. And then, ones that we're not so fond of, like this body lice and pubic lice and things like that, they've got grasping legs because they got to hold on to hair, and But, and then a lot of our insects, they're fast. They got to have running legs. And so, a cockroach, if I could run like any insect, it would be like a roach. They've got running legs, great legs. But the tarsi is important because sometimes these segments, that's how people identify them. And so like beetles especially, they'll do the hind leg, or the front leg, middle set of legs, and the back legs, and they'll say like it's a 5, 5, 5. So that means they're counting these segments in the tarsal, the tarsi, to identify their bug. So back to wings. So wings will only occur in the adult stage, and there are many different types of wings. We talked about the fly, which has 2 wings, and this is a fly. This is a syrphid fly, or a flower fly, and you can see their big eyes. They've got that short antennae, if you can even see it. But they've got 2 sets of wings. Here, this is a type of moth, a clear wing moth that's a day flyer, and this is a beetle. And beetles, they've got usually the line that goes down their back, and this is their elytra, so it's their harder part. Soldier beetles, they have pretty soft elytra, more leathery, but in turn, with the Japanese beetle and different scarab beetles, they have a really hard elytra, and it covers a membranous set of wings. So the membranous set of wings are underneath, and that's what's used for flying. But other insects can have scaly wings, hairy wings, leather wings, and some of them are like just softer than others. But if you ever hold or touch a moth or butterfly, you'll get a powder that rubs off into your hands because those are scales. That's what those wings are made out of. But insects are the only invertebrates that have evolved flight, and like some, like that dragonfly, they can move their wings separately. A lot of other insects, their wings actually, their front wings, forewings, and hind wings can actually hook together. That video there you saw is folded wings, and that's, this is a lady beetle, and you can see the elytra coming up and the membranous wings coming out, and it just flying away. Some of those true bugs, they've got they call it a half wing or hemelytra. And so that front wing right there has got, it's half kind of leathery and half membranous. But even if we don't see those wings, sometimes they're really just folded up underneath. And then there are many insects that don't have any wings at all. Some of them may have wing buds, some of them have wings and they don't use them, and then some of them just don't have them. So here's a couple things that don't have them. They are quite successful regardless. So, not all insects have wings. When it comes to the abdomen, sometimes there are features that will help identify the insect. Like the silverfish has these, 3 filaments that come off the end of the abdomen. And with the earwig, you can see they've got these, we call them cerci or claspers. So if someone says, oh, I have this long bug and it's got these pinchers, then, we could say that's likely an earwig. And other times you'll see an ovipositor or a stinger. Let me see. And sometimes the abdomen actually holds the key to ID. This is pretty strange, but if you know anything about white grubs, and so, the white grubs, when they grow up, they can turn into a number of different scarab beetles. But in terms of management and in control of turf grass, these could be pretty disruptive. And so if we want to identify what kind of grub it is, we just look at the raster, which is the grub butt. And, in this case, it's a mass chafer because it's just kind of random hairs. And then we know it's got a 1 year life cycle, when it's going to emerge as adult, and what the threshold is. And so if we don't see more than, 6 to 8 grubs in a square foot area, then we wouldn't really be too concerned. So, sometimes we need that abdomen and that those identifying features. I think we can probably take a break here if you would like, Terry, and you can give the Slidos if you'd like.
Oh, both of them or just the one?
I think we can do both.
Okay, so just stop sharing your screen.
All right.
I will open mine up. Can you guys see this Slido? So that's the first question. What is the function of the insect head? Remember, log in underneath code S118. Well, we've had at least 3 people answer it correctly, Jody.
Oh, that's good.
We haven't had any questions in the chat box yet.
Did David Lott end up getting to hear me?
Yep. I
okay.
got him on the phone and we got him taken.
Okay.
All right. So I think it should show the answer. There we go.
Yes, good job.
All right. So the next question, what is true of desiccant dust? That's a tongue twister. So we have a handful answering the first choice. We should have made these harder.
I know, I don't like to trick people.
All right, so let's check the answer on this one. Excellent. Very good, everyone. All right. So we will meet back here at 7:45 to get started again. I am going to find my other slide for you guys. And this will give you a reminder for the June 16th date. All right.
Like I don't like overwinter, like the eggs overwinter or the adults or. So I would say if they're in an egg or an egg capsule or ootheca, it will last through the winter, except if it's really warm. If it's in a greenhouse, I think it was said inside, right? So I think the adult, I mean, I've tried to keep the adult alive, but their lifespan is usually about, I would say 6 months, 4 to 5 months after it's become an adult. So even after, you know, feeding it and taking care of it, I didn't get her to live very long. She released like 3 ootheca in her life as an adult, and then she ended up dying.
Don't put it in your car and forget it in there either.
Yeah, don't do that either. Anytime it warms up, it will do like a premature hatching, and if there's no food for it, then that's a lot of work for one person to find. Or you can buy like flightless fruit flies at the pet store, but it's a lot. And then you got to separate them because they'll eat each other.
You're ready to go.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the internal anatomy and some processes of insects. We won't go too deep into it, just really briefly, because we kind of want to know how they work. So if you think about the insect as a tube, like a food tube, so food goes in one end and it comes out the other end. It's inside this insect, very, I guess, basic, how they breathe and how they use oxygen, but they have a series of tubes in their body called trachea, and it comes to the outside of the surface of their body in little holes called spiracles, and that's how they breathe. Sometimes you can see them, like in that picture with the Madagascar hissing cockroaches, you can see little holes on the side of their body. The thorax will have 2 pairs of spiracles on each side of the body, and then the abdomen will have 8 pairs. So so that's how oxygen goes, how they get their oxygen. Let's see, and then there are aquatic insects, and they can get their oxygen from the dissolved oxygen in the water. Some of them have gills, like dragonfly nymphs or naiads or whatever, they're aquatic nymphs. Some of the some aquatic insects are only aquatic for a portion of their life. Like mosquitoes, they are as larvae, they live in the water. That's where their eggs are laid, and that's where they are as larvae and pupae. And how they breathe is because they've got little breathing tubes on their body. So they do breathe oxygen in atmospheric oxygen. So they are going to find ways to breathe, but they do this through spiracles. And there's a visual. So their nervous system consists of a cord that runs throughout the bottom of their body. So their ventral nerve cord is what it's called. And these things called ganglia, which are fun to say. These are like little brains, but their main brain is in their head, but they have all these different ganglia throughout their body, so it can react to stimuli. So this is the reason why when they say that a cockroach can live a week without its head, and still respond if you touch it and blow on it and things like that, it will still run around, because these little ganglia throughout their body can react, but they will eventually die after a week because they are no longer able to eat without a mouth part. The circulatory system is different than ours as well. It's an open system, so because they don't have oxygen in their blood, and they use that, the spiracles and trachea, that their hemolymph is what we call it, is clear or colorless, and what their circulatory system is used for, it kind of gets pushed up, everything goes forward, and then in the hemocyl, which is what the body is called, and it rushes over, moves over the organs, and it moves the nutrients, the salts, the hormones needed, and all the metabolic waste. So that's how their circulatory system works. So it's very different. It's not like ours is a closed system, theirs is an open system. And when it comes to digestion and excretion, it's another tube. It's a tube in their body. They've got 3 different types of parts of their digestive system: the foregut, midgut, and hindgut. There's a lot of different things that go on with, reabsorbing nutrients and water and salts. But a lot of times when they poop or release frass, it's going to be uric acid, and sometimes you'll see that what they're eating is very similar to what they're pooping, just maybe a little bit drier because they absorb water out of there. Some insects also can take water out of the air. A lot of times they'll take it out of their food, so they don't necessarily have to drink a lot, but they can get moisture from different sources. And so of course, digestion is going to move out the back way. When it comes to reproduction, most insects do reproduce sexually, and you'll see them mating all over, especially, those soldier beetles, those yellow and black ones in the spring and in the fall. They are usually looking for mates using the pheromones, and also through vision and sound. And that's, so a lot of the things that we hear, we're just kind of getting in their way. When we hear crickets chirping, that's the male trying to find a female. When we see lightning bugs, that's also them trying to attract a member of the same species to mate with. And then there are, some insects or some fireflies or lightning bugs that attract other lightning bugs to eat them. So, they are adapted in different ways. When it comes to social insects like ants or termites, they do a mating swarm. So they release a lot of winged versions, and those are the reproductives. So they are the goal. And this is going to happen soon because it's, because spring is coming. They'll release males and females that have wings, and they are looking to increase genetic diversity, find a new colony or hole in the ground, and start their own colony of ants. If the population is in the home, it's not usually very successful because they can't get out. But that's why you will see ants with wings. Termites will also do the same thing. It's usually based on some kind of environmental event, like a good rain, because when it rains, the termites are able to, get back in the ground because it's of the moisture, and it's a little softer, and so they can start new colonies. And so sometimes insects that don't normally have wings will have wings because that's a time that they are swarming. And then there are the odd insects like aphids. And I know there's an invasive tick, the longhorn tick, that was found in Pennsylvania. These insects are what we call parthenogenic, and so they can actually reproduce asexually. So they can reproduce without mating, and that makes makes a pretty prolific pest because they don't need to find a mate. So that's why sometimes when you take a strong hose spray of water and take care of those aphids on the plant, you turn around and they're just as prevalent because they can reproduce parthenogenically. So now we'll go into what makes insects pests. And what makes them beneficial. But we've talked a lot about insects and some of their traits, and we know that there's a lot of them out there. But it's interesting to know that a lot of them are not going to be pests. So only 3% are cited as being minor pests, and only 1% are serious pests. And so this is kind of a beetle spectrum here on what, at this time, what we think are pests. Here in Nebraska, and what maybe are not pests. And these are all different beetles. They're very, pretty in their own way. I think they're all beautiful, but we are really hating on the Japanese beetle just because of what they have been doing to our plants through the last couple years. The June beetle, the green June beetle, pretty, doesn't do too much damage, but it's scary when it flies at you. And, the 7-spotted lady beetle, that one's not an overwintering in the house pest. This is one of the good guys, eats aphids, so it's beneficial. And then there's some like the eastern-eyed click beetle that people see and find. They're pretty large, very cool, and they're kind of neutral, right? They aren't doing anything to anybody. They're just there. So, generally most insects are neutral or considered to be beneficial. And there are many different cool things that we have in our world because of insects. A lot of our food is pollinated by insects and other pollinators. We've got things like silk. Insects feed a lot of some people in different countries, and also animals and livestock and other insects. We also have certain dyes, color dyes because of a certain kind of insect, and shellac is made out of a scale insect. What else do we have? Honey, beeswax. We think about some of the insects we maybe don't like as much, but we know that without them, we would have a problem with decomposition of plants and wood and animal material, right? That's why we've got beetles that feed on dead bodies, and we have flies that do that. We've got termites and ants that break down, a lot of cellulose matter. So they are beneficial in much of the ecosystem, but they do become pests for a number of reasons. We've got health pests, invasive species, food pests, structural pests, things that bother us because they're not pretty, and things that are annoying. But, I already mentioned some of the good factors of bugs, but some of them are pretty to see. Some of them are pretty to watch. A lot of people love butterflies. But then we'll also talk about, when we talked about complete metamorphosis, those beautiful butterflies are going to have to go through this stage of, destructive caterpillar. So these are things we need to think about. Also, we consider insects to be good bugs when they are predators or parasitoids of bad bugs. And I will go through some examples of that. Speaking of invasive species, the reason why some insects that aren't from here or non-native insects, so not all non-native insects are going to be invasive. They become invasive when they don't have any natural enemies to keep their populations in check. They don't have, we are not equipped to try to manage them in the best way possible. And they are out competing the native insects for resources, and so that makes it difficult. And the big one is emerald ash borer. We do have a lot of native boring beetles that bore into sick or dying or cut down, freshly cut down ash trees, but the emerald ash borer is a huge pest because they will attack healthy trees of all sizes of ash. And, if things are not treated, if the trees are not treated, then pretty much they won't be here in a while. And the ones that have been treated, a lot of homeowners want to know what they should do and what's happening now. And unfortunately, the story is you got to keep treating. You have to keep treating for the life of the tree. So those are the calls that are coming in now. But when people ask about why this is so damaging, is because it's an invasive species and it's not from around here. In their native land, they probably are not pests, and they have predators to take care of them. Recently, like last fall, the Asian jumping worm or invasive jumping worm, crazy worm, whatever you want to call it, there's 17 different species out there, but it was found, in Nebraska. And right now, we're not really sure how it's going to affect the landscape. We just know that in forest ecosystems, it's pretty bad because they are like decomposition on steroids, where it's like enhanced and they do such a good job breaking everything down that it all washes away all the nutrients. So, these are some invasive species to look out for, but this is when things become pests. And worms are not insects, but I just wanted to add that in there in case anyone had a question about that. But so insects will attack food, and they'll attack our food in the fields. They'll attack it in the the garden as it's growing, and they also attack it when it's harvested. We did have a lot of spotted cucumber beetle and striped cucumber beetle in the garden, and you can see that it can cause damage. It can cause a disease in the squash. I'm not sure how much it affected the yield of how much squash was removed from this area, but it did look pretty bad at the end of the season. Some pests cause structural damage. We call these wood destroying organisms. There are a bunch of different beetles. There are, powder post beetles and whatnot, but two main ones that we see in the garden and sometimes getting into our home are going to be termites and carpenter ants. Often this starts with some type of moisture issue when there's going to be wood on soil or grade. That wood to soil contact is not very good, and over time it can cause a lot of damage depending on where this is happening. So this was a deck with the carpenter ants, and this is the inside of a home for subterranean termites. But this is definitely a pest. And then other pests, when we talked about overwintering, so we talked about how insects really are dependent on the environment and the temperatures to survive because they're cold-blooded. So how they survive the winter, they either avoid it or they have freeze tolerance, or they can tolerate it. So to avoid it, some of them migrate, like the monarch or the painted lady, and others they come inside with us, which is terrible for us. But some of these, we call them overwintering pests. We keep getting more and more because they are invasive pests in some cases. They come in the fall, they get the sunny side of the house, they are attracted to that warmth, they walk up and they get into the cracks and the crevices around windows, under siding. You can see here the brown marmorated stink bug at the school was just all up in these little cracks. And every now and then they're going to come out when it's a sunny day, when they warm up, and they think it's time to get moving again, and then they're on the inside. People want to know how to stop them, but they're already inside. This is what it looks like on the outside. We've had box elder bugs for a number of years. They're usually by maple trees or box elder trees, and they also overwinter indoors or coming in, sliding doors or the doors on the sunny side of the house in the fall. We've got the western conifer seed bug that normally feeds on pine trees and conifer trees. They don't usually aggregate in large numbers, but you'll find quite a number of them in homes or in the fluorescent light bulbs and drop ceilings in some buildings. And then the multicolored Asian lady beetle, imported many years ago to control soybean aphids, and it turned out to be an overwintering pest indoors. And so, farmhouses and some houses are just really prone to having overwintering pests hang out. So this is like between, you know, window panes, and it's covered with lady beetles. So, you know, this does constitute of being a pest some time of the year. Other arthropods sting or bite, and, you know, some of them spread very detrimental diseases. The tick is an arachnid, not an insect, but ticks are, you know, Lyme disease is definitely, you know, like tick-borne illness is the biggest in the United States. You know, mosquitoes kill more people worldwide, but tick-borne illnesses affect more people in the United States. And even though, I mean, we have found the black-legged tick has been established in Nebraska as of last year. So it's something we want to watch for, you know, year round. We don't really have a tick season because the different species of ticks can be active at different times of year. So we just want to be careful of that. And if we can't, you know, stop them from being in our yard because they are, you know, on wildlife and whatnot, then we want to make sure we just do tick checks every now and then and make sure that we can remove a tick if it is embedded or biting us, at least, you know, right away. Some people are allergic to wasp and bee stings. And you know, it's life-threatening, so that would definitely be something that they would consider. You know, bees would not be as friendly to them as they are to some of us, right? So this is when they become pests as well. And then other bugs, you know, they're just considered nuisance pests because they bug people, and I think that's why people just call all of them all bugs. Cicadas get complaints, crickets get complaints, the minute pirate bug gets complaints, and even, you know, little midges or flies that don't bite. They just are annoying when they gather in large numbers. You know, sometimes they're attracted to lights and they come out when people are on their patio. So people get annoyed by it and they become pests. When it comes to the garden, you know, I mean, we're trying to have a really, you know, aesthetically pleasing, pretty place. And so some things, even though it's not killing your plants, may bother you. It just depends like how much work you're willing to do, and if you are really going to use different treatments. But, you know, we had a lot of caterpillars in our yard. These little tiny ones that are like little inchworms they're called the common pug. They don't do a lot of damage like the sunflower moths, but you know, sometimes people would not like them there. But it's very, very difficult to control them on coneflowers. And we had a lot of click beetles last year for I don't know what reason, but they are not they're not bad. They don't do anything to harm the garden. But, you know, and in fact, I think they're predators of other, you know, plant-eating bugs. But we did have complaints about those. But they are, you know, they're not damaging. And then, you know, there are some super pests that are a combination of reasons. They end up being just gross. They end up destroying a lot of things. And they end up year after year becoming a pest and ruining, you know, people's landscapes. So, you know, the Japanese beetles and the bagworms especially have become very, very, very important calls in all of our offices. And so, you know, over time, or even in the same season, this is what some of the, you know, the linden tree looks like, and this is what some of the spruce trees look like. And so it does end up costing a lot of money, and people don't like treating for it. So, you know, some important things to know is that, you know, when it comes to an insect pest, or if you want to know if this damage is caused by an insect or something else. So when an insect is going to feed on a plant, you're going to see evidence of feeding. You may see, you know, defoliation in this first picture here, these tiny little shot hole bites. These are made by flea beetles, and you can see little tiny flea beetles. They're really tiny, and they're called flea beetles because they have super, like, they've worked out on their hind legs. They can jump just like fleas. So you might try to see them, and they will jump really kind of just out of the picture. But that is evidence of feeding. This bean leaf beetle the master gardeners in the Hope Garden here in Omaha were wondering what was eating the beans. Every time they went up there, this is one of those beetles that play dead as soon as they hear you coming or see a shadow. So we couldn't find them unless until a certain time of day. Then I kind of was sneaking up on them. But you can see like the defoliation of those bean leaves were pretty dramatic. Japanese beetles, we know that they will turn things into doilies. They will defoliate the leaves and sometimes leave the veins, but they have a very characteristic feeding. And a lot of times they'll poop there too, so you may be able to see that too. So there's always going to be some evidence. If you don't see the beetle itself, you'll see feeding, you'll see frass, and then this is bagworm damage over many years, but that's on a shrub. Doesn't look so good. And with bagworms, you'll see the evidence of a bag, right? That's empty. Insects with piercing sucking mouth parts will cause a different kind of damage. So you may see some wilting, some yellowing. They've got that sucking mouth part. So they're feeding on the plant juices. So that damage is going to be very distinct. So this is, squash bug damage early on. And over here is two-spotted spider mite. And sometimes you'll see webbing with spider mites. This one I added in because you may see damage, but this is actually a predatory stink bug. And so it's one of the good guys. And so I thought it was pretty neat. So this was a spined soldier bug, which is a type of stink bug, feeding on the nymphs of squash bugs. Bug versus bug. So, these are the many other kinds of sucking insects that you may find on plants that will cause that kind of damage, that wilting, yellowing, and then ones that suck on plant sap and then poop out or excrete honeydew, like aphids, they can result in sooty mold, and that's this picture back down here. So it's like all black and sticky, and it looks awful. But some of the plant feeding insects that you may see or may not see, there's some aphids, there's a phlox bug, and they're damaging to the phlox flowers, leaf hoppers, and a lot of these are very small. And you can see them on the underside of the leaves most of the time hiding. This, where it looks like a bunch of spit here, this is called a spittle bug. If you take this and rub it, gently in your hands, and the spittle or foam disappears, you'll see a little bug that looks very similar, like a leaf hopper under there. These are scale insects. They don't move most of the time. They're just stuck there sucking on the sap, but they can cause a lot of damage over time. White flies that can be found in greenhouses as well, lace bugs, and then milkweed bugs. So some of these are more damaging than others, but these are all sucking type insects that may cause some of that damage. So you won't see, large holes, but you will see effects on the leaves. And so, sometimes you see those aphids and you see, sooty mold, but you may also see insects and predators that feed on those aphids. And so it's a whole ecosystem there. This is like the milkweed aphid and their predators. So you can see that when it comes to an ecosystem or a landscape, the good bugs and the bad bugs are there together, and it's the circle of life. So this is the larva of a syrphid fly. So those little fat flower flies that are, that may hover around and land on you, and they do no damage and they don't sting. Their larvae will feed on aphids. And then this is a ladybug larvae feeding on aphids. And then there's the lacewing larvae too. Other things that feed on aphids are going to be ants. They don't feed on the aphid directly, but they farm them kind of like their own little livestock. So sometimes when people have an ant problem in the garden, or they have an ant problem in their home, most of the time I would say that these ants are coming from outside. And most of the time, if they need a sugar source, they're going to use aphids. And the aphids feed on the sap, and then they excrete the honeydew. And the ant kind of antenates and takes care of them. And if you see aphids or you see ants, you will find aphids. And so it's actually pretty interesting because there's so many different, like these are all different types of aphids. And these are all, well, these two are the same ants. But they antinate, and you'll see a little drop of honeydew come out of the little aphid's butt, and the ant will eat it, and they just love it. So, you know, when people wonder what they do to survive when they're not in our houses, we have a lot of sugar out in the garden to take care of the ants. We just need to seal them out. Sometimes people call and they have a problem with the leaves of their lamb's ear. And what is happening is actually there's the European wool carder bee is scraping the trichomes or the hairs from that leaf in order to take back to its nest. And so you might find these little balls of cotton looking things all over your garden and wonder what's doing that. And it's actually this solitary bee that is scraping up those hairs. So some bees are going to use, you know, leaves or petals, like leafcutter bees, to provision their nests, especially in these, you know, artificial tubes or tunnels. But the wool carder bee, will take those trichomes and put that in there and lay an egg by it. So it's pretty neat, and it's something that unless you saw it, you would be very stumped as to why these little balls of cotton are in your garden and why, you know, something is looking kind of weird with your leaves. But then there's also these antlion pits that stump people as well. So if you've got really sandy soil, you know, by your porch or somewhere, and some of these antlions will have like a number of pits, and at the bottom of each one is this antlion larvae, which looks like this, which I actually have not seen, but it's a lot smaller than that. But that antlion larvae is called a doodlebug, and it's underneath this cone-shaped funnel. So it kind of was a funnel going down, and it's called an antlion because an ant that passes by will fall down in here and won't be able to escape, and the doodlebug will come up and with its big jaws eat that. So a lot of times people see these holes or pits in their garden and they want to spray for something, or they're thinking that it's an animal digging when really it's a very predaceous antlion. So it's doing its own pest control. So, you know, hopefully that's something new. Okay, so sometimes the insect is a pest based on the location of the nest, but really they shouldn't really, you know, be too much of a pest. So this is a bumblebee nest. And usually bumblebee nests are, you know, underground and sometimes away from people, but they also tend to nest in structures or bee boxes or bird boxes, or this was under a shed that someone was moving, a little plastic shed. And so this bumblebee nest, very different than a honeybee nest, very disorganized and out in the open. So they become a pest. You know, they're pollinators. We don't really want to kill them, but they become pests because they're in the wrong place. As well as sometimes those swarming ants that I was telling you about. This is in the garden, not really a problem, but if it's inside your house, you could see how that would be a problem. So now we're going to talk a little bit about butterflies. So the painted lady butterfly, this year we did have quite a bloom. They were you know, flying across highways and getting killed by cars by like the thousands, which was a little bit sad. But we can usually tell that there's going to be a big painted lady butterfly bloom in our area because down south is where they migrate from. And if there's a pretty good population there, it translates to being up here as well. And they can have, you know, 2 to 3 generations up here. The problem with them and what makes them a pest is because as a caterpillar, you know, often they're called thistle caterpillars, but they will also, so this is a caterpillar of a painted lady butterfly on thistle, they also will feed on soybean plants. And so that's really disruptive to the farmers. They were not liking the painted lady butterfly. Then when it comes to milkweed, we usually plant milkweed because we want monarchs. These little guys, they will destroy some of the leaves. These are milkweed tussock moth caterpillars. So they're little tiny yellow caterpillars when they're little. This is what their little egg sac looks like when they emerge. This is what they look like, you know, in later instars. And they kind of look like little puppies, like little Shih Tzu dogs, I think, with like their little tussocks hanging out here. And then they turn into a not so pretty moth, but they do destroy that milkweed plant. So that's a picture of that. This is the milkweed tussock moth. So, you know, it's good to know the difference between those. And the host plant is very specific. So sometimes if someone has something they need identified, if you ask them what kind of plant it was feeding on, that would be a huge clue to identifying what it is. And I know, you know, early on when I started doing more landscape and garden bugs, whenever I would ask Jonathan, like, what do you think this is? And, you know, if it was on an oak, it'd be like, well, it's an oak moth, you know, and, you know, 9 out of 10 times, like if you know the host plant, you can probably identify you know, what it is more specifically. So again, here's monarchs. So they're going to feed on a number of plants, but as larvae, they only feed on milkweed. So that's why when we want the butterfly, we need to provide food, you know, for the adult stage. So a lot of nectar, a lot of plants and flowering plants. And then for the larvae, we need to have some kind of milkweed plant. So this here, I can't remember what this one is, like swamp milkweed, but there's a bunch of different milkweeds out there that are going to be great for monarch caterpillars. We just need to plant enough and plant a lot and plant in you know, places that they can find it. This butterfly is pretty, but it was also pretty damaging last year. So I'm hoping that we do have a lot of these butterflies this spring. This is the checker spot butterfly, and the caterpillar did a lot of damage to sunflower and coneflower leaves. I know we got a lot of calls and pictures sent in to Backyard Farmer because it was just making the leaves look terrible like this. And over time, you know, they looked like this. And I kept telling everyone, well, they're going to be pretty butterflies. I didn't know if that made it better. But again, we cannot have pretty butterflies if we won't let the caterpillars eat, right? A big garden pest, literally, is the tomato hornworm. The tobacco hornworm looks very similar, and they both love tomatoes, and they're both very disliked by tomato growers. They do have a little bit of a different pattern with the chevrons and the stripes. In the horn, but they are very large caterpillars that will feed on tomato plants. Usually I just tell people to pick them off because they are pretty big, but you know, instead of spraying for them, but they will eat the tomato. This is what their frass looks like when it's fresh, pretty gross. But over time, like if you don't find the caterpillar, you will definitely find you know, the frass, which look like tiny little geometric shaped, like they look like tiny little grenades actually. But sometimes that's what you see first, because you can see they're very camouflaged. Sometimes you can have both on the same plant. And sometimes you can have a lot. This is how they overwinter. They overwinter in the soil, typically as pupa. So they've got this hard covering, and when you see them, yeah, they will wiggle if they're alive in there. But this is the different stages of going into pupation. And this is what they look like. People are usually curious as to what they look like when they are merged as adults. You know, they're not as pretty. They're pretty big moths. One is called the 5-spotted hawk moth, and the other one's called the Carolina Sphinx. And the difference is the number of these like orange spots on their body. But they're big, but yeah, nothing overly exciting. The woolly bear is a caterpillar that feeds on a number of things. It's a pretty famous caterpillar. There are a lot of festivals in different states named after this woolly bear. Turns into the Isabella tiger moth, which sounds prettier than it is. It's just a little white moth. But there is a lot of folklore that involves this caterpillar. They used to say that the more black there was on the body, the colder the winter was going to be. So when I first moved to Nebraska, people always wanted to know if that was true, and I had never heard of that. But so this was September 2017. So this caterpillar would be telling us that it was going to be a mild winter, and then these ones in October were probably going to tell us that it's going to be cold. And this was debunked. So caterpillars, the woolly bear, are not they're not like, I don't know, they cannot forecast the weather. So other caterpillars, sometimes they live between the layers of the leaves, like this solitary oak leaf miner. So if you see leaves that look like this, there's actually a little caterpillar between the leaves, and you can see all this frass that it's leaving behind. So it's kind of making a mess, but it's living between layers of leaves. Other damage by caterpillars, it's going to be, you're going to see those holes. It's irregular feeding. Sometimes they'll feed on flowers. Sometimes you'll see webbing. This is what the sunflower moths have done to some of my cone flowers. Tent caterpillars and fall webworm will make these giant nasty webs in different trees. The tent caterpillars will do it right in the crotch of the branches, and webworms will do it like a little further out, I believe. But you'll see it in there, and it'll be really messy and dirty because all their little droppings are in there too. But you will see the feeding, and you just dig deeper, and sometimes like in here, I found a lot more than I wanted to find. So that little cabbage head was totally consumed by a caterpillar. But the good thing is that there are predators out there that prey on these insects. So we don't necessarily have to do a lot of it if it's not really bothering us as much. But these generalist predators, they're not very picky. And so sometimes you will see these praying mantids, feeding on a lizard or a hummingbird, which is devastating to people who love wildlife and are feeding birds. Also, they will not hesitate to prey on a bee. They're predators, but we can't tell them what to eat and what not to eat. So this is the Chinese mantid. Sometimes, there's controversy whether these are invasive and we should, take them out or not. They do seem to be pretty successful here, and possibly out competing the Carolina mantid and our other native mantids, but this is what they look like. The Carolina mantids are a lot smaller, and the females are a lot kind of plumper, and their wings don't go all the way to the end of their body, but these are both Carolina mantids. They can be a variety of colors, but they are the smaller, kind of skinnier type praying mantids. And these are the ones we do want in our garden. Their egg capsules don't have as many nymphs as the Chinese mantid either. So wheel bugs are always kind of a curiosity when it's kind of later summer, when people see these giant bugs with this cog on its back, or this wheel with this giant mouth part. Most of the time, comment is, I've never seen one of these before. Like, what should I do with it? And these are predators. This is actually one of the only bugs I've seen that will eat and kill the Japanese beetle. So I think they're pretty good. They are usually kind of on their own, but they're predators, and I just say don't pick it up or crush it or anything like that, because though I've never been like pierced or bitten by one, that is a pretty thick mouth part, and I don't want to try it. So I would say just kind of leave them alone. We did talk about lacewings before and how beneficial they are. And so, they do control a variety of plant feeding pests. Robber flies, these are pretty neat. They're a type of fly that can actually eat a spider. We always think of spiders eating the fly. Well, this could be role reversal. So they are predatory flies. You may see them kind of stalking about like this one on the right. And then they're super cool. So the one in the middle is a giant robber fly, but this one, they call this a hanging thief. And if you watch it, and this poor little bee kind of got the short end here, but this robber fly is hanging on by like one leg and consuming it with the other. It was pretty amazing. But there are a lot of specialist predators, and so these are not, they are pretty specific to what they want to feed on. If you think about the cicada killer wasp and the cicada, there are incidences like this throughout. And so, we always talk about parasitoid wasps. And some of these wasps are pretty small. We don't even notice them, but there are a variety of parasitoid wasps that have their own, favorite host. So what parasitoids do is they lay eggs, or the female uses her ovipositor to lay eggs in the egg or in the larva of another organism. And then their larvae develop, consuming the other organism. And out of that pops, this wasp, or the parasitoid. So it's a little bit like Alien, but this is all real life. So this is a little wasp that is laying an egg. I actually caught this happening on asparagus beetle eggs. So, I mean, if you think about, these problems that we're having, there is a predator really out there for, many of these. This is a giant ichneumoniid wasp. People send these to me all the time because it looks like they have this long, weird hair type stinger. And what it does is it can locate the larva of a wood-boring beetle under the bark, and it uses that ovipositor and drills it into the bark, into that larvae, and lays an egg. And so these are essentially good bugs. If you look at the aphids that we have so many of, if you see these little ones that are a different color and they look like they're blown up, like they've kind of turned a little blimpy, these are called aphid mummies. And so these have been stung or oviposited by a wasp, and out of these little aphid mummies will come out a wasp. I had an experience at Schramm Educational Center last May, where they had these decorative wood sticks in their new education center made out of the ironwood from the woods. And Amber here asked me about what these little holes were, but as I was walking around, I was seeing these red-headed ash borers all over, which is a native ash borer. And then all these wasps were also hanging out on all the patrons and all the people that were there. And it turns out that out of here, beetles were coming out of some holes, and out of some holes, the wasps were coming out. So every one of these has its own predator. And when I looked really closely, I could see the head of this red-headed ash borer. So it was pretty neat to see it. It was a little bit of a disaster in there because people were just so worried, when really none of these things are going to reinfest, and they're not going to harm any people. So this is the cabbage white butterfly, and this is the cabbage worm. And these are pests of our cabbage. This is another case where there's a wasp that laid eggs in this caterpillar, and a couple days later, you could see the little spots where the wasp laid the eggs, and all these little larvae came out. It was kind of horrifying because that's not what I was expecting. But I went back and found this picture, and I actually saw that happening. So, the predatory prey relationships there are kind of fascinating when you see how many there are. And then this picture I wanted to add because these are the mini bags of the bagworm. And, we had a lot of bagworms last year, and we always say that they're in the evergreen trees, but these are just a variety of different plants that I've seen the bagworm in, and they've made really pretty bags out of different vegetation. I've seen them on onions, I've seen them on brick walls, I've seen them everywhere on a lot of places. And I wanted to show you, this is what the adult male bagworm looks like. It's a really dull, kind of boring brown fuzzy moth. And this is what the adult female looks like. I'm not really sure how to describe her, but she's made a turn for the worst. So she doesn't look like a moth, and she doesn't even look like a caterpillar, but she lays hundreds of eggs and leaves it in the bag. But the cool thing about this was that this wasp actually came out of some of these bags. And so the bagworm does have a predatory wasp. And then the last part of this talk, I was just going to go into a little bit about spiders. They often get forgotten when, because we were talking about insects, but we'll talk a little bit about the arachnids. And, there are a lot of spiders in the garden. They are predatory. Sometimes they scare us, but I think it's important to know about the things that we may see so that you can either, so that you can just be educated on whether or not you want to be with them, or, move them, relocate them, or, just leave them alone. But again, all spiders have 2 body parts, 4 pairs of legs, and all spiders have silk, and they also have venom. So when people ask if spiders are poisonous, they're not poisonous, they're venomous. But a lot of them aren't going to bite, and they may not be able to pierce your skin because they're so small, and they may not even inject venom. So they have venom, but they're not always going to be a problem, right? They're not going to be harmful. And most spiders have 8 eyes. And that is one way we do identify spiders, by their eye arrangement. This picture is here because daddy long legs, or this harvester spider, is not a spider. We call it a harvester. We call it daddy long legs, but this is, it's called an opiliones, but it does not have 2 body parts, has just 1. And it doesn't have silk, and it doesn't have venom. And it gets confused a lot for this cellar spider, which you can see clearly has 2 body parts, right, and eyes there. So we do see a lot of, daddy long legs. This is what I call daddy long legs, and they're harmless. And so I would not freak out about those, but they're predatory. Just kind of leave them alone. We do see a lot of diversity in orb weavers. These are often in the garden. They will, snag flying insects that are in the garden. Last year we had a really large number of the yellow garden spider here on the right. Very cool to see. And they pretty much don't want to bother anyone. They're just there catching flies in the garden. But all of these will spin one of those orb webs. So it's flat, vertical webs, spiral webs, and a lot of them will like consume them the next morning and spin a new web at night. They're very clean, but all of these are different orb weavers. The grass spider, we had a lot of these in the fall. They're often around the buildings. They can also be in the garden. They make those funnel webs, or those funnel shaped webs that are kind of horizontal. Things fall in it. It's not sticky, but they can feel that vibration and they come out and they feed on things. But you can tell that it's a grass spider by the length of the spinnerets. It's very prominent. So when you look at them, the spinnerets will be very, very long. Wolf spiders, they seem to be getting bigger here in Nebraska, is what people are telling me, but they can come in all sizes. Some of these are pretty big, but some of them are also pretty small, but they can be identified because of their eye arrangement. So they've got 2 of their largest eyes here, and then they've got 2 eyes back here, and then they've got a row of 4 up front. And if those is not the eye arrangement, then that is not a wolf spider. Wolf spiders are pretty well known for carrying their egg case with them. I think she'll carry that with her to protect it. And then after the spiderlings hatch, she carries them on her back. And so, you will always hear those stories of someone hitting a spider and hundreds of babies flying off of it. That's kind of what happens, but they don't fly. But so, if you do have a chance to remove a spider, the cup method and a piece of paper underneath is probably the best way to go. That way you can release the spider outside and babies won't jump off its back if it's a wolf spider. Fishing spiders are being found more often in around the garden and around structures like sheds, or they could be very similar to the size of a wolf spider, but their eye arrangements are kind of like a row of 4 and then a small row of 4. They've got really long legs, and they're called fishing spiders because they can catch fish, and they're known to being close to docks and water, but they're also very prevalent in the landscape, and they hold their eggs in a different way. The wolf spider holds it back in the abdomen, and the fishing spider up front. We also see little tiny jumping spiders that are pretty cute. I'm a little biased, but doesn't that look like a puppy? They've got big 4 eyes, like big up here, and then they've got a couple eyes back at the back of their head. But these are active hunters. They do not have webs. Neither do the fishing spiders or the wolf spiders. They're out, actively hunting, not sitting in webs. And then the woodlouse hunter is very common where there are going to be woodlouse or those pill bugs. And this one is actually kind of sleeping with these pill bugs. So that was kind of cute. This spider was in the news a couple years ago as being like a deadly spider, and it's pretty harmless. Most spiders are going to be totally harmless as long as you don't don't have them up against your skin. So, you know, if you've got a lot of spiders, make sure you shake out your clothes, check your boots, and just don't roll on them or squish them, and everything should be okay. There's only 2 spiders that have any medical importance in Nebraska, which is the brown recluse and the black widow spider. Oh yeah, there's that woodlouse hunter. And then the last one that I want to talk about are crab spiders. They're also called flower spiders. These are always in the garden because they love sitting in flowers and waiting for flying insects to come, and you know, often they will catch the pollinators and the flies and stuff. So they're just ready to grab, and they look just like a crab. So, you know, hence the name. But they are pretty neat, and they're not doing anything but just looking for a meal. So I think to wrap this up, you know, I'm hoping that you learned something from this and didn't get too tired, but, you know, that I hope that you've recognized some of the value that insects have in our ecosystem, and understand some of the structures that help distinguish them from each other, help distinguish some damage compared to you know, diseases or different pathogens, understand a bit about insect biology so we can better manage pest species and take care of ones we don't think are pests. And also that you could see a lot of the different pictures of the different life stages of some of our most common insects that we will see in the garden. And with that, I appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I am, you know, I love Master Gardeners, and I love what you do, and I will always be willing to answer any of your questions anytime you need me. Thanks.
So Jody, we have a couple questions in the chat box from Dakota County. They have, well, 2, I think. So first one is, how do you tell the difference between the Asian jumping worm and an earthworm?
Okay. So when it comes to those, okay, so I don't know how to identify every worm, but I can distinguish the invasive worms, the jumping worms, from regulars or the other night crawlers or other worms. So when you look at a worm, and if it's mature, it will have the clitellum, which is the reproductive part, you know, like I don't know what it's called. It's the reproductive organ of a worm, but it's like the fat part, you know, it's a different color. For the jumping worm, it's going to be very flat. It doesn't stick out, and it's not segmented. So if you have a regular worm, you would see that it's got segments through its whole body, and the clitellum still has segments. For the jumping worm, it's a very light, cloudy looking clitellum. It's very shiny, doesn't seem raised at all, and it doesn't have the segments on it. If you put it under a microscope, you'll see little hair or setae all the way around the whole body, whereas like for an earthworm, it will just have 2 on the sides. Another thing to look for is, so in the spring, if you see a large worm, it's not going to be an invasive jumping worm. It's going to be one of the regular worms, because invasive jumping worms are annual worms, so they will die every winter. They do leave these little cocoons or eggs, singular eggs, that are about the size of a mustard seed, so it's very hard to find. So in the spring, when it's warm enough, they'll start to emerge, and they'll be little itty bitty worms that we probably won't see, you know, unless we're looking for them. So it's only until the late summer and fall that we notice them, and some of them can be very, very long. And if you touch it or bother it, it will thrash around. It is like something that I've just never imagined in a worm. You can't really mistake it. It moves like a snake. It will drop its tail to escape. So, you know, seeing worms split is pretty horrifying. And it's also, when you touch it, they're not slimy. They feel like those fishing lures or gummy worms. They are very, very different in texture, and the way they look is sometimes almost iridescent or metallic. I don't know, it's probably way more than you wanted to know about worms.
So the next question is, insects in the home, can you spray with soapy water to kill them?
You can, but I feel like sometimes it makes a mess. So soapy water does kill them, but you need to contact them. It's not going to provide a residual. So, you know, if you saw those ants in that router, those odorous house ants were killed with soap and water because they were sprayed directly to them. You know, you just want to make sure nothing there is going to be damaged by the water. And I've heard that people that are spraying the brown marmorated stink bug with soapy water are also killing them. I mean, it's going to work because it's going to break down their waxy lipid layer, but you're going to have to, you know, like contact them with it. It's not something that you can spray and leave and it'll kill all of them, right?
So the next question is if you were to add earthworms to a compost bin, is there a specific one to use?
I am probably not the expert of that, but I don't know if there's a specific one. I know that, you know, people who do vermicomposting, we use the red wigglers, but I don't have them in an outdoor compost. I have them in an indoor worm bin.
I would go buy fishing worms.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's though how some of the invasive worms came to be though, because they do move very crazy and people love those kind of worms for fishing. So if they bought them online or somewhere for fishing and then didn't use them all and put them in the environment, there's that, you know, that could have happened. Sometimes they sell those as compost worms. So, you know, that's part of the reason why they've gotten so widespread.
So the next question is some master gardeners notice parts of India are being attacked by hordes of locusts. How does this happen? Can't they be controlled before they reach horde level?
Okay, so I know about what's going on there, but I don't know all like in depth. I can find out more, but I know, so people will call cicadas locusts, but locusts are a type of grasshopper. And when they are called locusts, it's kind of like a mob mentality. Like there's so many, they're bigger, they're stronger. It's just whether it's the environmental conditions or the amount of food, or it's just one of those cyclical things that happen. Like, I mean, you want to say it's not something that happens often. That's why it's something that's like this giant devastation right now. I don't know much other than that. I do know that they have sent, you know, a lot of different entomologists there to try to stop it. But in those kind of things, it just takes over and they, like, I don't know if it's like a hormonal thing, but it's physical, hormonal, and they're just bigger than what they would be without the group.
So that is the last question I have in the chat box. If there's any others, I think we are done. Thank you so much, Jody. Loved all your pictures.
Well, I'm glad they could go somewhere. And I'll see everyone on the 16th of June.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.